So going into 2010 and 11, that was when the big power started coming in. Everyone started to put V8s in their cars. Cars were making up to 800 horsepower, and that was when I had my first full season, not only in 370Z, but with that Nissan Motorsports engine that was making about 750 horsepower. The car was very simple. It still had factory angle, factory brakes, factory suspension links for the most part. Had all the factory steel in the back, had a factory gas tank. There was not much to that chassis in 2011. Just because it was new to us, and we were trying to develop it as we went. Going into that season, it was just once again just the consistency that got us up into the top 3 running for the championship that year without even really kind of knowing it. We're just kind of like slowly chipping away all season long, and next thing you know, we come into the final round and we're close to the top 3, but I didn't really think that we had a shot at that. As the top ranked drivers started knocking themselves out, it was a very stressful event, not just for me, but for all the people involved, because Daigo was leading the championship, and I think he went out in like 32 or 16 like right away, and it was like, oh my god, like he kind of blew it, like it's that stress of like now you have to sit and wait. I think Tyler McCrory had like the next shot at it, and then he knocked himself out, and then Justin had a shot at it and he knocked himself out, crashed into the lower wall. And then all of a sudden I hear Jim Lau, because they're all crunching the numbers, trying to figure out like who's where and ending up where, and they're like, oh, if Chris wins the event, he can be the champion. I was like, wait, what? Like, wasn't even paying attention, didn't know we had a shot at it at all. I don't know, maybe it was like a little bit of a mind, because I basically like got that information as I'm going into my semifinal battle, where I'm just doing one of my like, wild card events, like we're in it to see how far we get. We were lined up with Reese Millen, and long story short, he beat me. It was a fair win, so I end up in the consolation round. So it's like, okay, well, we had no idea that was even a chance, so so be it. But then we find out that it's me versus McNamara in the consolation round, and this is probably one of the reasons why there is no consolation round anymore. So we're lined up, and we find out whoever gets third in the event gets third overall in the championship. So I'm like, oh, like hell yeah, like let's do this. I led first, and I go through and do my run, and it's clean whatever run, and he's pretty close, maybe a mistake or two. His car was super wound up. This is before tire to weight, and I think he made a little mistake, because in the second run, I'm chasing him, and it's like, hearing from the spotter, like, just keep it clean, do the run. And so I come off the bank, and with all 40 degrees of steering angle that car had stock, I over-center the start-finish line and come around and smack my front driver's side corner into the lower wall, and like instantly just like threw it away, like, crash the car, like don't get third overall, whatever. And like as I'm getting out of the car, I see Darren's car smash into the lower wall. Like, the heck happened? So I mean, it seemed like he was just going as fast as that little car could go, trying to bury me in the wall, which worked, but he ended up burying himself. And so since we both crashed out and it was just a huge mess, they went back to the first run, which I had the advantage on, and we got the win. And so this goes to another championship, but a big mess to clean up in the third place battle, because like I always said, the third place battle is one of the best ones because it's your last chance at a podium, and so people really go for it, but you usually end up with a big mess, and it drags the show on too long, so sorry about that.
Reese Millen, good initiation, and look at that, his car ironically black as he looks like a shadow next to Reese Millen's Hyundai Genesis Coupe.
Great proximity right there from Daigo Saito, but Reese Millen a little bit offline as he transitions back around to the hairpin.
Daigo Saito having no problem navigating.
For Tyler McCrory, as Daigo Saito may have an easy battle ahead of himself, and Tyler McCrory now all over the track. It is definitely over unless Daigo Saito spins out.
Well, Tyler McCrory knew he had a deficit. Do or die. Daigo or Daijiro. Good initiation by Daijiro, utilizing the whole track. Daigo Saito is right there, every move he makes.
Nice transition right there by Daijiro Yoshihara. Now Daigo Saito pouring on the proximity, diving into this last part of the course right here is Daigo Saito.
Out of the gate as Matt Powers initiates into that first turn, Daigo Saito is right there.
No problem on proximity for Daigo Saito, and Matt Powers continues to struggle with the whole use of the course as we come in to the hairpin right here. Daigo Saito dives ahead.
Matt Powers a bit off of that rear clipping zone, but tight on that final.
He sits atop the podium with Daijiro Yoshihara in second, and newcomer to the series, Daigo Saito in third.
There are many eras in Formula Drift that are marked by certain themes, and they mostly have to do with drivers. The early days was really about Reese Millen and Samuel Hubinet. The middle era was really about this new breed of driver, a la Chris Forsberg, Von Gittin Jr., Ryan Turk, Daijiro Yoshihara, all homegrown drifters. The Daigo era is a secondary era during that time. And what Daigo kind of brought to the series was everybody having to rethink how they approach this sport, because this is where the term proximity got coined. Daigo had this crazy way of like surging in and out, and really never really making a lot of mistakes. But it was if you think about James Dean today, where like James dives in and stays on you and is like, you know, white on rice. Daigo was the first to kind of do that in a very pronounced way. And he had this surging kind of mode. And it was so much about grip and horsepower, 1,200 horsepower in his car when he came in. And he won the championship in his first year as a rookie. Everybody rethought how to approach driving after that. And you saw it because the battles got much more aggressive, it became much more about proximity. And it really did define kind of an era before where we are now.
So yeah, Daigo shows up and he is right out of the gate making like 50% more power than the next car. He's doing like 1,200 wheel, turbo 2J with nitrous, and you know, super wide grippy tires, and just immediately is just pressing on every single car in the field. And this is where proximity was born, and you know, it wasn't about, you know, having the angle, just being as close as possible. And he was able to do that with just like sheer horsepower and grip. And so, you know, just break off, you know, transfer and just drive right back in there. And, you know, he might be taking out inner cones and this, that, and the other, but in 2012, that was the most exciting thing you could see, is the chase driver basically pushing the lead car through the course. As long as he kept drift, it was always a bit shaky, but it was just that much more exciting than two cars like this. And so I, you know, fell into it, everybody fell into it, and we all just started trying to make more and more power, and you know, a lot of people started breaking their drivetrains, but yeah, Daigo came in and started winning those championships, so it was pretty cool. Another fun fact about Daigo that I didn't realize, well, I'll save that for later, it's a good story. Yeah.
Through that smoke, you can barely see him. The good old Houdini. First you see him, now you don't. Man, I don't know how he is seeing through that smoke.
Well, it's tough, because especially when you have a group of drivers that are driving against each other, more or less, for so long, you have, you know, a variable come in. It's, you know, trying to figure out how to adapt to that as quick as possible, right? Because he obviously is very skilled. He's not just some guy who's coming in and running in the middle of the pack. He's, you know, paving the way and setting new expectations on what tandem can be. And it's kind of like the same thing when you go to a new racetrack, right? Like we have a new venue that shows up, and all of a sudden you have to adapt and figure out that course, figure out the line as fast as possible. And we've actually been more successful at new venues, probably more than most teams, like either qualifying very high or being on the podium right out of the gate. So just as you put it, like being able to adapt and understand how to get the most out of the car as quick as possible is what's most important in our sport, because with drifting, it's always a variable. There's not a long endurance aspect of it. It could be raining all of a sudden. You know, you have the biggest variable of all, which is the driver next to you. And so being able to make adjustments to your car and having the confidence that it's the right move, and you know, going into a brand new battle against someone with basically zero practice on a big change on the car and being able to drive through it.
Two drivers remain, Chris Forsberg and Michael Essa. Essa is leading the championship, but Forsberg is close behind and could possibly take his second title.
So we come into Irwindale and we're sitting second place behind Essa, and it was, you know, a decent point gap, but at the time this was when the point structure was different than it is now. So in top 32, you would earn, I think, 16 points. Beating that first driver, right? So top 32 to top 16, you beat one driver, you get 16 points. But then from 16 on, it was, what, like 8 points, like 7 points, and would kind of slowly drop down until you got to the finals, where you get from second to first is another 10 points. And so he did qualify first, he put down a killer run, and he earned a couple more points than me. I think I was like, you know, mid-upper pack. Typical, like 8 to 10 somewhere. If he went out in 32 and I won 32, which I had Daigo Yoshihara, you know, no slouch. If he went out in 32 and I won 32, I win the championship, and it was done right there. But if he got even top 16 and went out there, I had to get all the way to second place. That didn't really make much sense to me. So it's like, goes from if he beats one guy, I had to beat like 4 to beat him, but if he got knocked out and I beat one person, like I would win. So that's, the point structure has been changed since then. It makes a lot more sense, but that was the potential scenario. And so here we go into the top 32 battle. He's the first driver out since he qualified first, and I'm like 4 pairs back with Dai. We saw that they were having some issues in practice and try not to think about it. We're like, they'll get it together. Don't even think about that. Focus on the event. He pulls up and goes to do his first run. He's running against Luke Bakula, which is one of his buddies. And so that was his first time qualifying as well into a Pro 1 event, well, Pro event at this time. They take off and Essa goes into the course and he gets, around the bank, and at some point in time coming off the bank or the start finish, wherever, car shuts down, brakes, loses power, and he basically coasted back in. Bakula like kind of goes around him, drifts around the last turn, and then pulls back around to the start finish line, does a little 180, pulls up to the start. Essa's car comes rolling in, hood's up, he's out of the car, helmet's off, safety gear off, and they're basically just like, arms up, like car's done. And I'm sitting there, like I'm strapped in, like 2 pairs out, like watching this whole thing unfold, and I was like, oh my God, this is actually happening, right? They're looking around the car, and the official goes over to Bakula saying like, oh, like Essa called 5 minutes, his car broke. Bakula's like, oh, like let me make sure my car's okay. It made some noise. He drives straight forward, does a little figure 8 on the front straight, pulls back around, goes back over to his pit and parks the car. And so we're just sitting there like, okay. And like, I got my spotter in my ear, like, don't worry about that. Like, he basically knows he's out and we got to go out, beat Dai, win the championship. So he's like, don't worry about that. Don't worry about them. Focus on your run, blah, blah, blah. So we go out, we do our 2 runs with Dai, and we get the clear win. And so it was not easy. I was super stressed out. I was like all shaky, thinking about it, because that was like the scenario we were hoping for. And so we go out and we do the run, we come back in, and as we finish up our run, we see, what was that? I forget what actually happened physically, but it was, we were told that, Bakula can't present his car to the line, so he forfeits his second run, thus giving the higher qualifier driver the win. And so Essa's car was dead in the water. Bakula's car, who drifted the last turn, drove to the start line, did a burnout, and went back to the pit, now could not present itself back to the start line. And all he had to do was that in order to get his first top 16 finish in his first pro event. You would think that any driver would want to achieve that. However, he did not. And so he parked the car, Essa gets the push into top 16, and we're up in the stands kind of like, waving our arms around, like not in the stands, we're up in the judges tower, like waving around like what is this, like what is going on? His car clearly works, he's forfeiting on purpose, like is that allowed? And there's like no real rule, I guess, against that. And so we put in our protest, but it wasn't really against anything. There wasn't really much we could protest for. So we go back through the whole halftime thing, and top 16 comes and they like drag Essa's car out there and like buy a truck and park it there, and it was just whatever. And we had to now get all the way to the finals in order to win the championship. And then top 8, I get Daigo. It was close, like his car was tight. I came under him in the start finish line, or I'm sorry, I came under him at the end of the bank. I took out the candlestick, and that was enough to give the win to Dai, and so I was knocked out, and that was it. Daigo goes on to win the whole event, and Essa then wins the championship, and we were pissed, for lack of better words. So not a good ending to that season. Yes, we got second place, but it didn't seem like people were playing fair to get that championship. That's the way it seems, because they're very good friends. It would be like if Dylan did that for me, and I would never want him to do something like that, right? Especially if it's like your very first event, your first qualifying thing. You have an opportunity to be in the top 16 intros, which some drivers still have never done. You're telling me that all you had to do was put your car back to the start line, which it not only did donuts and a little burnout, and then drove itself back to the pit. You could get that thing to the start line if you wanted that win. But he didn't. He got out of the car and just kind of like walked away from it. That's where it doesn't make sense to me, because any driver will drive their car till the wheels fall off, right? Or anyone that calls himself a driver will take that chance to get the win, even if the car is at stake. You're not even being asked to drift the course. You gotta drive at 40 feet.
I've heard from people in and around Chris's camp that after 2013, there was almost like a renewed sense of competition fire that he brought into 2014. And no surprise, that's the second championship.
I don't think 2014 would have been as successful as it was if what happened at Irwindale didn't happen, because it just left a sour taste in my mouth, and I was just like, mad, and this whole like points, this, that, and the other, and contact versus not, and blah blah blah. And so it was like, we went back and stripped the car down, rebuilt it, trying to make it as good as it could be. Put some additions on the car. Mostly the nitrous was the big thing. So we added like another 150 horsepower to the car, and just came out guns blazing. And it was another thing that we focused on, that another reason why Essa had won that championship versus us was he was always qualifying higher than us too. And so we put emphasis on finishing higher in qualifying and not just worrying about the tandem, which is what I usually typically focus on. That year, we not only won the championship, but we also got Ace of the Year. We're the highest qualifying driver all season long, which would barely even get the high spots, let alone just out there just like getting firsts and seconds and thirds all season long. So all those points add up a lot, especially if you get a lot of top threes. And so we put emphasis on qualifying. It was just like a different mindset. It was like screw you, we're here to win, like nothing else. And it was like, I won the first event, and yes, it was exciting and it was fun, but it was more like, I've done this before, like I'm doing it today, like type attitude, like there's nothing stopping me. 2014 was easily the best season we ever had.